What if the stories we've dismissed as mere myths were actually ancient blueprints of disaster, hidden messages passed down through generations? Picture this: a civilization thousands of years ago witnesses a catastrophic flood, an eruption that darkens the sky, or an earthquake that reshapes the land. Without modern science to explain these events, they weave them into legend stories of gods and heroes, of divine wrath and survival. But here's the chilling part: what if those tales weren't just fiction? What if they were precise records of real catastrophes, disguised as folklore to preserve the truth? From the flood myths that echo across cultures from Mesopotamia to Greece, from the Bible to indigenous traditions, to the volcanic eruptions described in vivid detail by ancient poets, there's an unsettling pattern. These stories don't just share similarities, they often align with geological and archaeological evidence of actual disasters. Take the legend of Atlantis, a thriving city swallowed by the sea in a single day. Could this be a distorted memory of a real tsunami or earthquake? Or consider the Norse myth of Ragnarök, a world-ending battle preceded by natural chaos: fiery skies, crumbling mountains, and oceans rising. Sound familiar? It's almost as if these myths are time capsules, preserving warnings we're only now beginning to decode. This isn't just about connecting dots between stories and science. It's about understanding how ancient cultures processed trauma, how they turned unimaginable terror into narratives that could survive centuries. And here's the most compelling question of all: if our ancestors encoded these disasters into myths, what else might they have left for us to uncover? Today, we're peeling back the layers of time to reveal the hidden science inside epic myths, the startling truths behind legends that predicted real-world disasters. Along the way, you'll see how folklore isn't just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting timeless human resilience, ingenuity, and perhaps even a roadmap for our future. So let's begin this journey together, because some stories were never meant to be just stories. Think about how much of your childhood was shaped by tales told around campfires, bedtime fables, the legends your grandparents shared. Now imagine those stories weren't just whimsical entertainment, but lifelines. For ancient cultures, oral traditions were the hard drives of their world, storing everything from history to survival strategies. Without written records, they crafted myths with layers of meaning, embedding warnings about floods, famines, and eruptions into the very fabric of their storytelling. These weren't just dramatic flourishes. They were memory aids, carefully designed to stick in the mind and outlast generations. Take the Aboriginal Australians, whose songlines, oral maps woven into music and stories, guided tribes across vast deserts for thousands of years. These narratives didn't just describe landmarks, they encoded directions, water sources, and seasonal changes. Similarly, the Inuit legend of Sedna, a goddess whose anger churns the seas, may have been a way to teach respect for unpredictable ocean storms. Even the Greek myth of Persephone's descent into the underworld mirrors agricultural cycles, reminding listeners when to plant and harvest. These stories weren't merely symbolic, they were practical, repeatable lessons wrapped in unforgettable imagery. What's truly remarkable is how accurately some myths align with geological events. The Klamath tribe of North America speaks of a battle between the sky god Skell and the underworld spirit Lau, ending with Mount Mazama's fiery collapse, a tale that eerily matches the volcanic eruption that formed Crater Lake 7,000 years ago. Halfway across the world, the Minoan civilization's oral traditions likely preserved memories of the Thera eruption, a cataclysm so vast it may have inspired Plato's Atlantis. These weren't coincidences, They were survival tools, ensuring that even centuries later, people would recognize the signs of disaster. So why did these warnings hide in plain sight? Because the best way to protect knowledge isn't to lock it away, it's to make it unforgettable. By weaving facts into folklore, ancient cultures ensured their children's children would remember. Today, we're just beginning to decipher these coded messages, realizing that the oldest stories might hold the keys to our future. The story of a great flood is one of humanity's oldest shared memories, a tale so universal it echoes from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia to the oral traditions of indigenous tribes in the Americas. Whether it's Noah gathering animals 2 by 2, the Sumerian hero Utnapishtim building a massive ark, or the Inca legend of Yunu Pachacuti, where the world was drowned and reborn, these stories share an uncanny resemblance. But here's what's fascinating. Geologists have uncovered evidence of catastrophic flooding around 7,000 years ago, a time when melting glaciers and rising sea levels could have triggered disasters on a global scale. Take the Black Sea deluge hypothesis. Scientists believe that around 5,600 years ago, rising waters from the Mediterranean burst through the Bosporus Strait, flooding the Black Sea basin with such force that it may have expanded shorelines by miles in a matter of days. For the people living there, it would have been an apocalypse, one so traumatic it seared itself into cultural memory. Could this be the origin of flood myths like Noah's? Or consider the ancient city of Shuruppak in Mesopotamia, where archaeologists found layers of silt matching the timeline of the Epic of Gilgamesh's flood story. These aren't just coincidences, they're clues hidden in the earth itself. What's even more intriguing is how these myths preserve precise details. Many describe not just water, but specific warnings, divine messages, animals sensing danger, or the construction of vessels with exact dimensions. The Babylonian Atrahasis epic even mentions pitch used to waterproof the ark, a detail mirrored in the biblical account. These aren't the hallmarks of pure fiction, they're the kind of practical knowledge survivors would pass down. And the similarities don't stop there. From the Aztecs to the Aboriginal Australians, flood stories often feature a lone survivor or a small group repopulating the earth, a narrative that aligns eerily with genetic evidence of human population bottlenecks in our distant past. So why would ancient cultures preserve these memories as myths instead of straightforward history? Because stories survive where facts fade. A list of flood measurements wouldn't captivate generations, but a tale of divine wrath, heroic survival, and rebirth. That sticks. These myths served as both record and reminder, ensuring that even centuries later, people would recognize the signs of rising waters. Today, as we face our own climate uncertainties, these ancient warnings take on new urgency. They're not just relics of the past, they're proof that humanity has always had to adapt, and that sometimes the oldest stories hold the sharpest lessons. Volcanic eruptions are among nature's most terrifying spectacles, towering plumes of ash, rivers of molten rock, skies darkened for weeks. Now imagine witnessing that raw power without any scientific understanding, trying to make sense of the unimaginable. It's no surprise that ancient cultures framed these events as battles between gods and monsters, weaving their trauma into myth. But what if these stories were more than just explanations? What if they were survival guides disguised as legend? Take the Greek myth of Typhon, a monstrous giant with 100 serpent heads, whose breath was fire and whose very presence made the earth tremble. When this creature battled Zeus, the skies burned, and the land shook violently, details that mirror the eruption of Thera, one of the largest volcanic explosions in recorded history. Around 1600 years before the Common Era, this Mediterranean island, now known as Santorini, detonated with force equivalent to hundreds of atomic bombs. Thera's collapse triggered tsunamis that devastated coastal civilizations, while ash blotted out the sun for months. To those who survived, it must have felt like the gods themselves were at war. Even more striking are the clues hidden within these myths. The legend of Atlantis, described by Plato as an advanced island kingdom swallowed by the sea in a single day and night, bears uncanny similarities to Thera's fate. Archaeological evidence shows the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri, buried under volcanic pumice, was a thriving hub with intricate plumbing and vivid frescoes, echoing Plato's account of Atlantis' sophistication. But here's the chilling detail. Minoan pottery found on nearby Crete contains volcanic ash, suggesting survivors fled the eruption, carrying their stories with them. Over centuries, their oral histories may have morphed into the Atlantis tale, preserving the memory of a real disaster beneath layers of allegory. What's truly remarkable is how some myths seem to encode practical advice. The Native American Klamath legend of Lau and Skell describes Mount Mazama's eruption with eerie precision fiery explosions, a mountain collapsing inward, and even a warning to flee to higher ground. Modern geologists confirm Crater Lake, formed by Mazama's collapse, matches the timeline of this oral tradition. Similarly, Icelandic sagas speak of fire giants dwelling beneath volcanoes, cautioning against settling too close to smoking mountains. These weren't just colorful tales, they were community-taught hazard maps, ensuring future generations recognized danger signs. So why dress these lessons in myth? Because terror has a way of sharpening memory. A dry geological lecture wouldn't captivate children for centuries, but a story about a fire-breathing dragon. That sticks. By embedding survival strategies into narrative, ancient cultures turned trauma into teachable moments, ensuring their descendants would recognize the rumble of an earthquake or the sulfurous stench of an impending eruption. Today, as scientists study these myths alongside sediment layers and ice cores, they're finding that our ancestors weren't just storytellers. They were eyewitnesses, historians, and survivalists all at once. Their legends remind us that sometimes the most enduring truths come wrapped in the wildest tales. Earthquakes have always been one of nature's most unpredictable forces, sudden, violent, and utterly terrifying. Without the science to explain shifting tectonic plates, ancient cultures turned to myth to make sense of the chaos beneath their feet. In Japan, legends speak of Namezu, a colossal catfish buried deep underground, whose thrashing tail sends tremors rippling through the land. This wasn't just whimsy, it was an astonishingly prescient metaphor. Modern seismology reveals Japan sits atop the volatile Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic plates grind against each other like restless giants. The Namezu myth didn't just explain earthquakes, it embedded a truth about the land's instability, passed down through generations in a form too vivid to forget. Halfway across the world, the Maori of New Zealand told of Uamoko, the god of earthquakes, whose stirrings in his mother's womb caused the ground to shake. The Greeks blamed Poseidon, the earth shaker, whose trident strikes could split the land. But what's remarkable isn't just the creativity of these stories, it's their eerie accuracy. Take the ancient Incan legend of Pachacuti, a world-reversing cataclysm where the Earth itself turned upside down. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive pre-Columbian earthquakes in the Andes, with ruins showing precisely the kind of structural collapse described in oral traditions. These myths didn't just personify disasters, they documented them, preserving details that align with modern geological findings. Even more fascinating are the survival lessons hidden in these tales. The Native American Pomo tribe's earthquake myth warns of a time when the earth twisted like a rope, a description that mirrors the lateral movement of strike-slip faults. Their stories often include instructions to seek open ground during tremors, advice that matches modern earthquake preparedness guidelines. Similarly, Japanese folklore describes how the Namezu's movements could be appeased by a giant stone, a nod to the stabilizing power of bedrock. These weren't just stories, they were coded manuals teaching generations to recognize danger and react instinctively. So why wrap these lessons in mythology? Because fear has a way of sharpening memory. A dry lecture on seismic waves wouldn't have survived centuries, but a tale of a giant catfish or an angry god. That sticks. By turning trauma into narrative, ancient cultures ensured their descendants would remember not just the terror of earthquakes, but how to survive them. Today, as scientists study these myths alongside fault lines and sediment layers, they're uncovering a startling truth. Our ancestors weren't just storytellers. They were the first seismologists, writing their findings not in textbooks, but in legends too compelling to ignore. Across cultures and centuries, the night sky has been humanity's first cosmic warning system, a vast canvas where ancient astronomers read signs of impending disaster. When a comet streaked across the heavens, tails blazing like a celestial torch, it wasn't just a spectacle. To our ancestors, it was an omen. The Chinese called these visitors broom stars, their sweeping tails symbolizing the sweeping away of dynasties. Records from the Han Dynasty describe a guest star so bright it cast shadows at night, a supernova now identified as the Crab Nebula, its explosion witnessed in the year 1054. But here's what's extraordinary. These weren't just poetic observations. They were meticulous records, etched into bone and bronze, preserving cosmic events with startling accuracy. The Greeks told of Phaethon, the reckless son of Helios, who lost control of his father's sun chariot and scorched the earth. Ancient descriptions of this myth, rivers boiling, forests ablaze, the sky itself catching fire, bear an uncanny resemblance to the thermal pulse of an asteroid impact. Modern researchers have found evidence of airbursts like the one over Tunguska in 1908, where a meteor exploded with the force of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, flattening 800 square miles of Siberian forest. Could Phaethon's story be a garbled memory of such an event, or consider the Hopi legend of a sky knife that fell to Earth, bringing destruction, a tale that aligns with Arizona's meteor crater, formed 50,000 years ago by a nickel-iron asteroid? These myths don't just describe chaos, they catalog it, preserving trauma in the language of legend. Eclipses, too, were woven into the fabric of warning. The Vikings spoke of Skal and Hati, wolves chasing the sun and moon, whose occasional catches plunged the world into darkness, a vivid metaphor for solar and lunar eclipses. Babylonian clay tablets from the 7th century before the Common Era contain precise eclipse predictions, proving ancient astronomers didn't just fear these events, they studied them. Even the Bible's book of Joel describes the sun turning to darkness and the moon to blood, imagery that mirrors the eerie red glow of a total lunar eclipse. What's remarkable isn't just the accuracy of these accounts, but their purpose. By framing cosmic phenomena as divine drama, cultures ensured these rare, terrifying events would be remembered not just as curiosities, but as lessons. So why encode celestial disasters in myth? Because the sky was humanity's first textbook. Without satellites or spectrometers, ancient observers relied on narrative to make sense of the inexplicable. A supernova wasn't just a dying star, it was a heavenly portent. A meteor wasn't space rock, it was a god's thrown spear. By wrapping astronomy in allegory, they turned fear into knowledge, ensuring that even millennia later, we'd look up and remember. Today, as we piece together these cosmic clues, we're not just decoding myths, we're rediscovering the birth of science itself. written in the stars by storytellers who dared to ask, what if this happens again? Long before science could explain volcanic winters, the Norse were already warning of Fimbulwinter, a nightmarish 3-year winter so harsh it would herald the end of the world. According to legend, snow would blow from every direction, the sun would vanish, and brother would turn against brother in desperation. It's easy to dismiss this as poetic doom-saying, but what if this myth was rooted in something far more real? In the year 536, a mysterious fog plunged Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia into 18 months of darkness. Temperatures plummeted, crops failed, and societies teetered on collapse. Tree rings from that period show almost no growth, a telltale sign of climate catastrophe. Now, scientists believe a massive volcanic eruption, possibly from Iceland or Alaska, was the culprit, spewing enough ash to dim the sun across continents. The parallels between Fimbulwinter and real volcanic winters are too striking to ignore. When Indonesia's Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, the following year became known as the Year Without a Summer. Snow fell in June across New England, European harvests withered, and famine spread like a shadow. Sound familiar? The Norse, living in one of the most volcanically active regions on Earth, would have experienced these disasters firsthand. Their myths didn't just describe suffering, they embedded survival wisdom. Tales of storing extra food, insulating homes with earth and sod, and even the taboo against fratricide during famine. These weren't just dramatic flourishes. They were hard-won lessons from generations who'd endured the unthinkable. What's truly remarkable is how the Fimbulwinter myth anticipates modern climate science. The Eddas describe wolves swallowing the sun and moon, plunging the world into cold, a metaphor that mirrors how volcanic ash blocks sunlight. Even the 3-year timeline aligns with historical eruptions, where lingering aerosols can disrupt weather patterns for multiple growing seasons. And the Norse weren't alone. The Irish Labyrinth recounts a similar 3-year winter, while Anasazi pottery from the American Southwest shows abrupt shifts to survival-focused designs during ancient droughts. These weren't coincidences, they were cultural memory in action, preserving trauma in stories too vital to forget. So why wrap these warnings in myth? Because survival depends on storytelling. A dry account of temperature drops wouldn't grip a child's imagination, but a tale of hungry wolves chasing the sun. That sticks. By encoding their worst winters into legend, the Norse turned fear into preparation, ensuring future generations would recognize the signs and remember what to do. Today, as we face our own climate uncertainties, Fimbulwinter isn't just a relic of the past. It's a testament to human resilience, proving that sometimes the oldest stories are the ones we need most. The ocean has always been a source of both life and terror for coastal communities, its moods shifting from calm to catastrophic in moments. When ancient cultures spoke of sea monsters stirring the waves or gods unleashing walls of water, they weren't just spinning tales. They were documenting some of Earth's most devastating forces. Take the Indonesian legend of Nyai Loro Kidul, the queen of the southern sea, whose wrath could summon towering waves to swallow entire villages. This myth may seem like fantasy until you compare it to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, where waves reached heights of 100 feet, obliterating coastlines across 14 countries. Parallels are chilling. Nyai Loro Kidul's stories often describe the ocean receding violently before her waves strike, a phenomenon modern science recognizes as the telltale withdrawal of water before a tsunami's crushing surge. But Indonesia isn't the only place where myths mirror nature's fury. The Pacific Northwest's indigenous tribes tell of Ayohos, a shape-shifting serpent that shakes the land and sea, creating floods. Geological evidence shows this region has experienced massive earthquakes and tsunamis every few centuries, with oral traditions preserving details modern seismologists would later confirm. One Salish story describes a thunderbird battling a whale, causing the ocean to rise and retreat, a narrative that aligns perfectly with the cascading effects of a subduction zone earthquake. Even the ancient Greeks had their own version. Poseidon wasn't just the god of the sea, he was its destroyer, capable of summoning waves that toppled cities. When archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Hylike, a city swallowed by the sea in 373 before the Common Era, they found evidence of a tsunami so powerful it matched the descriptions in Poseidon's myths. What's truly remarkable is how many of these stories double as survival guides. The Maori of New Zealand speak of Tangaroa, the sea god, whose anger is preceded by tremors and strange tides, exactly the sequence of a tsunami-triggering earthquake. Japanese folklore warns of Namezu, the earthquake catfish, whose thrashing could send waves racing toward shore. These myths don't just describe disasters, they encode the signs to watch for, teaching generations to flee inland when the ocean suddenly retreats or the ground shakes near the coast. In Sri Lanka, oral traditions passed down for centuries saved entire villages during the 2004 tsunami. The Moken people, known as sea nomads, recognized the receding water as a warning and led their communities to higher ground, thanks to an ancestral story about the wave that eats people. So why cloak these lessons in myth? Because the sea is unpredictable, but stories are unforgettable. A technical manual on tsunami evacuation wouldn't captivate a child's imagination, but a tale of a vengeful sea goddess or a clashing thunderbird. That lingers. By wrapping survival strategies in narrative, ancient cultures ensured their warnings would outlast written records, carried across generations in the most durable container of all memory. Today, as scientists study these myths alongside sediment layers and fault lines, they're uncovering a profound truth. Our ancestors weren't just storytellers. They were the first disaster preparedness experts, writing their findings not in textbooks, but in legends too vivid to ignore. When rain refused to fall and rivers shriveled to dust, ancient cultures didn't see bad luck, they saw divine punishment. The Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, depicted as a lioness breathing fire, wasn't just a symbol of the sun's scorching heat, she was the embodiment of drought itself. According to myth, when humanity grew rebellious, Ra unleashed Sekhmet to burn the land with her breath, a story that eerily aligns with paleoclimatic data showing catastrophic droughts in the Nile Valley around 4,200 years ago. Tree rings from ancient cedar forests in Lebanon tell the same story, prolonged dry spells that would have turned fertile fields to cracked wasteland. But here's what's fascinating: these myths didn't just describe suffering, they prescribed solutions. The rituals to appease Sekhmet involved offerings of red beer, dyed to resemble blood poured onto the earth. On the surface, it's a plea to a vengeful goddess, but look deeper, and it's also a primitive form of irrigation, channeling liquid into the soil during ceremonies that doubled as water conservation practices. Halfway across the world, the Mayan myth of Chok, the rain god, reveals a similar ingenuity. When Chok grew angry, he'd hide in caves, taking the rains with him. To lure him back, priests performed elaborate ceremonies at cenotes, natural sinkholes that were the Maya's primary water sources. Modern archaeologists have found evidence that these rituals coincided with the driest months, suggesting they weren't just spiritual acts but timed interventions to protect dwindling water reserves. Even the act of throwing offerings into cenotes had a practical side. Sediment studies show these sacrifices increased during drought periods, possibly to reduce contamination by keeping humans away from critical water stores. The line between prayer and pragmatism was blurrier than we've assumed, but perhaps the most startling connection lies in Australia, where Aboriginal Dreamtime stories speak of the rainbow serpent, a creator being who controls waterways. Certain tales warn that disturbing specific rocks or trees will anger the serpent, causing it to withhold rain. Geologists now recognize these forbidden sites as natural water catchment systems, areas where subtle landscape features channel precious moisture during dry spells. By sanctifying these locations as taboo, indigenous elders weren't just spinning myths, they were safeguarding ecological knowledge that sustained communities for millennia. So why wrap drought survival in divine drama? Because desperation demands creativity. A list of water-saving tips might get ignored, but a story about a fiery lioness or a vengeful serpent, that sticks. These myths served as both cultural memory and climate adaptation, encoding survival strategies in narratives too compelling to forget. Today, as we face our own climate crises, these ancient stories remind us that the greatest survival tool isn't just technology, it's storytelling itself. The idea of an entire city vanishing beneath the waves or crumbling into the earth feels like something straight out of fantasy until you step onto the shores of modern Crete. Here, archaeologists have uncovered the ruins of Minoan settlements buried under layers of volcanic ash, their vibrant frescoes frozen in time. This isn't just the stuff of legend, it's a real-world echo of Atlantis, Plato's fabled kingdom lost to the sea. But the Minoans weren't alone in their fate. From the Breton myth of Wise, a wealthy city drowned by divine punishment, to the Indian legend of Dwarka, said to lie submerged off the Gujarat coast, these stories share a haunting pattern. Civilizations thriving one moment erased the next. And the science behind these tales is even more compelling. Take the ancient city of Hylike, once a powerful Greek settlement near the Corinthian Gulf. In 373 before the Common Era, it vanished overnight during a catastrophic earthquake and tsunami. For centuries, Hylike's existence was dismissed as myth until archaeologists discovered its remains buried under coastal sediment, exactly where ancient texts described. Similarly, the legend of Wise, a city swallowed by the sea after its princess opened forbidden floodgates, may have roots in actual coastal subsidence. Geologists have found evidence of rising sea levels along Brittany's coast around 1500 years ago, a time that aligns with Wise's supposed downfall. These aren't just eerie coincidences. They're proof that oral traditions preserved real geological events long before modern record-keeping. What's most striking isn't just the accuracy of these myths, it's their function as ancient hazard maps. The story of Atlantis, for instance, describes a hub of advanced engineering built on a precarious island, its people growing arrogant before their downfall. Plato's account even specifies that the city's circular design made it vulnerable to seismic shifts. Compare that to Akrotiri, the Minoan city buried by Thera's eruption, where excavations reveal sophisticated multi-story buildings, some with reinforced walls to withstand earthquakes. These details suggest the Atlantis myth wasn't just a morality tale. It was a warning about the dangers of overconfidence in unstable landscapes. But why encode these lessons as legends? Because stories travel farther than facts. A dry geological report on coastal erosion wouldn't have captivated generations, but a tale of a doomed city, its gates flung open by human folly. That sticks. From the Maya's tales of underground rivers swallowing cities during earthquakes to the Japanese legend of Ryugu-jo, a dragon palace that rises from the sea only to drag the careless beneath the waves, these myths served as communal memory banks. They reminded people where not to build, when to flee, and how to respect nature's power. Today, as we uncover more of these lost cities, from Indonesia's sunken temples to Egypt's underwater Heracleion, we're not just finding ruins. We're rediscovering humanity's oldest survival guides, written in the language of myth. The next time you hear a story about a city lost to the sea, remember, beneath the dragons and divine wrath, there's often a grain of truth. Our ancestors didn't just witness disasters, they turned them into narratives too vivid to ignore, ensuring their warnings would ripple across millennia. And in a world where rising tides and shifting lands still threaten, these ancient tales might just hold the wisdom we need to listen before it's our cities that slip beneath the waves. Animals have always been humanity's silent sentinels, whispering warnings long before disaster strikes. Ancient myths are filled with creatures behaving strangely before earthquakes, floods, or storms, and modern science is now uncovering the startling truth behind these legends. Take the Roman tale of the sacred geese who saved Rome from a Gallic invasion by honking wildly in the night. Historians often frame this as a story about vigilance, but there's another layer. Geese, like many birds, are extraordinarily sensitive to vibrations and subtle changes in air pressure. What if their alarm wasn't just about invaders, but an instinctive reaction to seismic tremors or approaching storms the Romans couldn't yet perceive? This isn't just speculation. Before the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, eyewitnesses reported elephants stampeding to higher ground, dogs refusing to go outside, and flamingos abandoning low-lying nesting sites. These weren't random acts. Research shows animals can detect infrasound, the low-frequency vibrations preceding earthquakes, or sense shifts in electromagnetic fields. Even Aristotle noted how rodents and snakes fled the Greek city of Helike days before it was destroyed by an earthquake in 373 before the Common Era. Today, scientists in earthquake-prone regions like Japan and California study everything from catfish agitation to beehive disruptions, searching for reliable biological warning systems hidden in plain sight for millennia. The Chinese legend of the loach, a fish said to grow restless before storms, mirrors modern observations of aquatic species detecting barometric pressure drops. Native American traditions speak of owls hooting persistently before wildfires, a behavior now linked to their ability to smell smoke particles undetectable to humans. Even the ancient Egyptians documented mass bird migrations preceding Nile floods, events later tied to distant rainfall patterns sensed days in advance by avian navigators. These myths weren't just quaint folklore, they were meticulous records of animal behavior as an environmental early warning system. So why did ancient cultures encode these observations as myths instead of field guides? Because stories stick where lists fade. A dry manual on animal behavior would be forgotten, but a tale about heroic geese or prophetic fish, that endures. By wrapping survival knowledge in narrative, our ancestors ensured future generations would pay attention to nature's subtle alarms. Today, as technology fails to predict some disasters, we're rediscovering what myths never forgot. Sometimes, the best warning systems aren't machines, but the creatures who have shared this planet far longer than we have. The so-called Curse of the Pharaohs has haunted popular imagination for centuries. Stories of archaeologists dropping dead after disturbing ancient tombs, their fates sealed by supernatural vengeance. But peel back the layers of legend, and you'll find something far more intriguing. These curses may have been humanity's first attempts to explain very real, very deadly environmental hazards. Take the infamous case of Lord Carnarvon, the financier of Tutankhamun's excavation, who died weeks after entering the tomb in 1923. Newspapers blamed the mummy's curse, but modern research points to something equally sinister: toxic mold. Sealed for millennia, Egyptian tombs became breeding grounds for Aspergillus flavus, a fungus that attacks the lungs, a condition matching Carnarvon's fatal pneumonia. Even the tomb's canary, whose sudden death fueled curse rumors, may have succumbed to airborne spores rather than supernatural forces. Ancient builders couldn't have known about microbial hazards, but they certainly understood the dangers of confined spaces. Some curses inscribed on tomb walls describe the breath of the gods, striking down trespassers, a phrase that takes on new meaning when you consider the real risks of carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide buildup in unventilated chambers. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote of laborers falling ill after entering sealed crypts, their symptoms mirroring modern carbon monoxide poisoning. Even the biblical account of the curse on Jericho's rebuilders, where children sickened after the walls rose, could reflect the effects of trapped gases in densely packed mud-brick structures. These weren't just ominous threats, they were observational science in mythological clothing. The most compelling evidence lies in the specificity of certain curses. One 18th dynasty warning threatens that evil shall slay with its smell, while another describes assailants collapsing with burning lungs. Fast forward to 1973, when archaeologists at Polish crypts discovered a mysterious grave wax coating the walls, a fatty acid compound that releases noxious vapors when disturbed. Similar substances have been found in Egyptian tombs, capable of causing the exact symptoms curse victims reported: dizziness, respiratory distress, even cardiac arrest. The ancients may not have understood chemistry, but they recognized patterns. If multiple people fell ill after breaching a tomb, the logical conclusion: the dead were fighting back. So why frame these dangers as curses? Because fear is the ultimate deterrent. A sign reading, "Danger, toxic mold," wouldn't have stopped grave robbers in antiquity, but a threat of divine retribution. That kept tomb raiders at bay for millennia. These myths served as biological hazard signs long before the skull and crossbones symbol existed. Today, as microbiologists swab tomb walls and analyze ancient bacterial DNA, they're uncovering the grim reality behind the legends. The curse of the pharaohs wasn't magic, it was nature's own booby trap, disguised in the language of the supernatural to ensure even the boldest trespasser would think twice. High atop the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the Oracle of Delphi sat perched above a chasm in the earth, breathing in vapors that sent her into prophetic frenzies. Ancient historians like Plutarch described her convulsions, her voice shifting to unnatural tones as she delivered cryptic messages from the gods. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as superstition until modern geologists made a startling discovery. The temple sits directly atop two intersecting fault lines, where seismic activity releases pockets of ethylene gas, a sweet-smelling hydrocarbon known to induce trance-like states. Suddenly, the priestess's visions take on a terrifying new dimension. The parallels between her prophecies and earthquake precursors are impossible to ignore. Eyewitnesses reported the oracle's predictions often came in fragmented, chaotic bursts mirroring the way animals behave before tectonic shifts. She spoke of the earth roaring and foundations crumbling, phrases that align eerily with Greek records of subsequent quakes. Even the timing of her prophecies raises eyebrows. The oracle was most active during periods of heightened seismic activity in the region, as confirmed by sediment layers in nearby caves. This wasn't just coincidence, it was cause and effect. The very fumes that fueled her visions may have been nature's early warning system, her subconscious picking up on subtle geological changes before they manifested as disaster. What's even more fascinating is how the temple's design amplified this phenomenon. The Adaptation, the chamber where the oracle sat, was built over a fissure in the rock, with a bronze tripod positioned to concentrate the rising gases. Visitors described a scent of crushed bay leaves, a detail that matches ethylene's distinctive aroma. modern experiments show exposure to similar gas concentrations can trigger altered states, complete with hallucinations and euphoria. The priestess wasn't just channeling Apollo, she was literally intoxicated by the earth itself, her brain translating tectonic stress into symbolic visions. But here's the chilling implication. If the oracle's prophecies were shaped by seismic activity, some of history's most pivotal decisions might trace back to geological quirks. Cities were founded or abandoned, wars waged or avoided based on her cryptic advice. The line between divine guidance and subterranean chemistry blurs entirely. Today, as scientists study fault lines and gas emissions, they're uncovering a truth the ancients sensed but couldn't articulate: that the Earth doesn't just shape landscapes. It shapes minds, myths, and perhaps even the course of civilization itself. The greatest tragedy isn't just the loss of knowledge, it's forgetting how much was lost. When flames consumed the Library of Alexandria, they didn't just burn scrolls, they erased entire ways of understanding the world. Ancient accounts describe a blaze so catastrophic it darkened the sky for days, a disaster so profound it became mythologized across cultures. But here's what's haunting: the library's destruction wasn't a single event. It was a slow unraveling, victim to earthquakes, riots, and political purges over centuries. Each wave of loss left gaps so vast that later generations filled them with legends of a golden age when humanity knew secrets since forgotten. Consider the story of the Sibylline books, a collection of prophetic texts said to contain Rome's destiny. According to myth, a mysterious old woman offered 9 volumes of wisdom to King Tarquin, demanding an exorbitant price. When he refused, she burned 3 and offered the remaining 6 at the same cost. After another refusal, she burned 3 more, until the king finally purchased the last 3 at the original price. This wasn't just a fable about stubbornness, it was a parable about the escalating cost of ignoring knowledge until it's too late. The surviving books were consulted during crises for centuries until they too were lost in a temple fire. The lesson: once wisdom vanishes, no amount of gold can bring it back. But what if some myths hold clues to how ancient cultures tried to safeguard knowledge before disaster struck? The Jewish legend of the 36 righteous people, hidden pillars of virtue who sustain the world, mirrors real efforts by scholars like Maimonides, who secretly copied and dispersed sacred texts during persecutions. The Islamic tale of the Cave of Treasures, where Adam and Eve preserved divine knowledge before the Great Flood, finds eerie parallels in the real-life Genesis storerooms of Cairo, where crumbling manuscripts were preserved rather than destroyed. These stories weren't just metaphors, they were survival strategies, encoding the urgent need to duplicate, hide, and scatter knowledge against the threat of annihilation. The most poignant example lies in the Mayan codices, folded bark paper books filled with astronomical calculations and medicinal lore. Spanish priests burned thousands as works of the devil, but a handful survived, hidden in caves or passed down through oral traditions. Today, researchers using multispectral imaging are recovering faded glyphs from these fragments, proving that even the most fragmented knowledge can whisper across centuries. The myth of the phoenix, reborn from its own ashes, takes on new meaning here. Civilizations may fall, but ideas have a way of resurfacing when least expected. So why do these stories of lost libraries and last-minute rescues resonate so deeply? Because they speak to our deepest fear that progress is fragile, that darkness can swallow light in an instant. But they also carry a defiant hope that if even one scroll survives, if one storyteller remembers, the chain of wisdom remains unbroken. As we digitize ancient manuscripts and scan crumbling ruins, we're not just archaeologists of the past. We're the latest link in a chain stretching back to those first librarians who looked at the flames and thought, How do we make sure this never happens again? Standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, it's impossible not to feel a sense of awe, not just at its size, but at its precision. This colossal structure isn't just roughly aligned to the cardinal directions. It's oriented to true north with an accuracy that would challenge modern engineers. The pyramid's sides deviate from perfect alignment by less than a fraction of a degree, a feat that seems almost supernatural for a civilization without compasses or satellites. But here's what's even more astonishing. Ancient Egyptian texts describe the pyramid's construction as a divine act, with gods like Thoth imparting sacred geometry to mortal architects. Could these myths be more than just allegory? Could they be encrypted manuals preserving advanced knowledge we're only now beginning to decipher? The pyramid isn't alone in this mystery. Halfway across the world, the Maya built El Castillo at Chichen Itza with such mathematical precision that during the equinoxes, sunlight creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down its steps. Local legends speak of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, descending from the heavens to share wisdom with humanity. The alignment isn't just symbolic, it's a functional calendar, tracking solstices and agricultural cycles with uncanny accuracy. Similarly, the Inca's Coricancha temple in Cusco was designed so that sunlight during the winter solstice would illuminate a golden disk, signaling the year's turning point. Indigenous oral traditions describe the temple's architects as children of the sun, gifted with celestial knowledge. These aren't coincidences, they are proof that myth and mathematics were once inseparable. Even more intriguing are the megalithic sites like Stonehenge, where towering stones align with solar and lunar events. The legend of Merlin magically transporting these stones from Ireland isn't just fantasy. It might encode a forgotten truth about how Neolithic engineers moved and positioned multi-ton rocks. Experiments show that certain myths describe techniques like using wooden sledges and water-lubricated tracks could actually work. And then there's Göbekli Tepe, a 12,000-year-old site in Turkey, adorned with carvings of animals that some researchers believe correspond to constellations. The builders left no written records, but their myths, passed down through generations, may have carried the blueprint of their astronomical knowledge. What binds these structures together isn't just their precision, but the stories surrounding them. The Hindu epic Mahabharata describes the construction of a celestial gateway with stones that float, a detail that mirrors modern experiments showing how acoustic levitation could theoretically move massive objects. The Norse sagas speak of Asgard's walls being built by a giant with a horse that hauled stones impossibly fast, a tale that takes on new meaning when you consider how ice-assisted transport could explain rapid megalith movement in Scandinavia. These myths don't just decorate history, they might be the last echoes of lost engineering techniques. So why cloak these secrets in legend? Because knowledge is fragile, but stories endure. A technical manual etched on papyrus might crumble, but a tale of gods and giants that survives conquests, disasters, and millennia. Today, as archaeologists scan pyramids with muon detectors and decode temple alignments with software, they're uncovering something profound. Our ancestors didn't just build structures. They built narrative, stone and story intertwined to ensure their wisdom would outlast the ages. And the most thrilling question remains: if we've only decoded a fraction of these myths, what other secrets might still be hidden in plain sight? The legend of the Phoenix isn't just a story about a magical bird, it's a blueprint for how life rebounds from devastation. Across cultures, this mythical creature bursts into flames, only to rise anew from its own ashes, a powerful symbol of cyclical renewal. But what if this wasn't just metaphor? Modern ecology reveals that wildfires, often seen as purely destructive, are actually catalysts for rebirth. In the charred aftermath of a blaze, certain plants like the lodgepole pine release seeds only when exposed to extreme heat, while fire-activated fungi enrich the soil. The phoenix myth, in its essence, mirrors this very process nature's way of ensuring life persists even after catastrophe. Ancient storytellers may not have understood the science of ecological succession, but their myths captured its rhythms with startling accuracy. The Aboriginal Dreamtime story of the firehawk describes birds carrying flames to regenerate the land, a narrative that aligns with real-life observations of raptors spreading fires to flush out prey. Similarly, Norse mythology speaks of the world tree Yggdrasil, which withers during Ragnarok only to sprout fresh greenery, a parallel to how certain forests rely on periodic burning to clear dense undergrowth and allow sunlight to reach saplings. These stories weren't just fanciful tales, they were oral textbooks teaching generations that destruction and renewal are two sides of the same leaf. Consider the Mediterranean's Maquis shrublands, where wildfires have shaped ecosystems for millennia. Local legends speak of the ash-born ones, plants said to spring from the cinders of divine battles. Botanists now recognize these as pyrophytic species organisms like the fire lily, whose bulbs lay dormant for years until flames trigger their blooming. Even the timing in these myths holds water. Greek accounts of the phoenix's 500-year cycle loosely match the recurrence intervals of natural fires in some ecosystems. The parallels are too precise to dismiss as coincidence, so why wrap these ecological truths in myth? Because resilience is best taught through wonder. A dry lecture on nutrient cycling wouldn't inspire a child, but a tale of a radiant bird rising from embers that plants hope in the imagination. These stories served as psychological lifelines, assuring communities that after drought, fire, or flood, life would find a way, just as the phoenix always does. Today, as we face unprecedented environmental shifts, these ancient narratives remind us that endings are often disguised beginnings. The next time you see a wildfire's aftermath, remember, somewhere beneath the soot, seeds are already stirring, waiting for their turn to rise. The Trojan horse stands as one of history's most enduring symbols of deception, a wooden behemoth hiding soldiers within its hollow belly. But what if this iconic myth wasn't just about stealthy warriors? What if it was a metaphor for something far more insidious, ancient biological warfare? Dig beneath the surface of Homer's epic, and you'll find eerie parallels to real-world tactics of poisoning and disease spreading. The Greeks didn't just breach Troy's walls, they infiltrated the very bodies of their enemies. Take the legend of Philoctetes, the Greek archer abandoned on an island because of a festering wound so vile his comrades couldn't bear the stench. Ancient texts describe his suffering in gruesome detail: fever, rotting flesh, agonizing pain symptoms that mirror real infections like gangrene or even anthrax. Some scholars suggest his divine punishment might have been a deliberate act of biological sabotage, his arrows dipped in decomposing tissue to infect Trojan targets. It's a chilling thought. The first recorded use of a poisoned arrow wasn't just a hunter's trick. It was a primitive form of germ warfare disguised as myth. Historical accounts outside of legend confirm these tactics were no fiction. The Hittites, enemies of ancient Egypt, wrote about driving plague victims into enemy territories to spread sickness. During the siege of Kaffa in the 14th century, Mongol forces catapulted corpses infected with the Black Death over city walls. Even the Bible's Book of Kings describes Assyrians poisoning wells with rye ergot, a fungus that causes hallucinations and convulsions. These weren't isolated acts, they were calculated strategies, and the Trojan horse myth may have been encoding this dark knowledge in plain sight. The most compelling clue lies in the details of the story itself. After the Greeks presented the horse as a gift, Trojan priests warned of hidden dangers, sensing something unnatural about the offering. Could this have been an early understanding of contamination? The horse's belly, dark and cramped, would have been the perfect breeding ground for bacteria or toxins, a literal Trojan horse for disease. Even the timing is suspicious. Troy's downfall coincides with periods of archaeological evidence showing mass graves and sudden population declines, hinting at possible epidemics rather than just battlefield losses. So why cloak these horrors in myth? Because some truths are too terrifying to face directly. A straightforward account of biological attacks might have been erased or forbidden, but a legendary tale of a wooden horse that survives millennia. These stories served as both cautionary tales and covert records, warning future generations that the deadliest threats aren't always the ones you can see coming. Today, as we grapple with pandemics and invisible enemies, the Trojan horse takes on new meaning, a reminder that sometimes the oldest stories are the ones we need most. The twisting corridors of the Minotaur's labyrinth have haunted imaginations for millennia, a maze so complex no one who entered could escape. But what if this terrifying myth held a hidden truth about ancient disaster preparedness? Beneath the palace of Knossos on Crete, archaeologists have uncovered sprawling underground chambers with winding passages eerily similar to the labyrinth's description. These weren't just royal storage rooms, they may have been life-saving refuges during earthquakes or volcanic eruptions that frequently rocked the Bronze Age Aegean. The legend of Theseus navigating the maze with a guiding thread takes on new meaning when you consider how these tunnels could have served as escape routes during collapses, the thread symbolizing a way to retrace steps through pitch-black chaos. Even the Minotaur itself, a monstrous hybrid lurking in the maze's heart, might encode a deeper warning. Ancient frescoes at Knossos depict bull-leaping rituals, a dangerous practice tied to seismic activity. Bulls were sacred to the Minoans, often associated with Poseidon, the earth shaker. Could the Minotaur represent the primal terror of being trapped underground during quakes, where the very walls seem to roar like a beast? The myth's gruesome detail of Athenian tributes being sacrificed to the creature aligns with geological evidence showing tsunami deposits from the Thera eruption that may have devastated coastal settlements. Those who sought shelter in the labyrinth's depths might have been the only survivors, their ordeal later retold as a harrowing encounter with a monster. Other cultures tell similar stories of underground safety. The Cappadocian region of Turkey is honeycombed with entire subterranean cities like Derinkuyu, carved deep into soft volcanic rock. These multi-level complexes could house thousands during invasions or seismic disasters. Local legends speak of hidden realms beneath the earth, where people vanished for months before emerging unscathed. Even the Bible's account of Lot fleeing to a cave after Sodom's destruction mirrors this theme, with caves offering refuge from cataclysms above, the common thread. Myths didn't just describe labyrinths, they preserved vital knowledge about where and how to hide when the earth turned violent. Perhaps the most compelling clue lies in the labyrinth's dual symbolism. While later Greek versions framed it as a place of dread, older Minoan art depicts the labyrinth as a sacred spiral, a symbol of rebirth. This shift from sanctuary to prison in the storytelling might reflect a cultural memory of shelters becoming tombs during particularly devastating quakes. Modern seismologists studying Knossos have found evidence of multiple rebuilds, suggesting the palace was repeatedly damaged by tremors. The labyrinth myth could be a composite of generations' worth of trauma and resilience, compressed into a single gripping narrative. So why disguise survival tactics as a monster story? Because fear is a powerful teacher. A dry manual on earthquake preparedness would have been lost to time, but a tale of a hero outwitting a bull-headed horror. That indoors, these myths ensured that even children would remember the layout of safe passages or the sound of rumbling earth. Today, as engineers study ancient underground cities for inspiration in disaster-proof architecture, we're realizing the old stories got one thing wrong. The real monster wasn't waiting in the maze. It was the disaster itself, and the labyrinth was always the way out. The Hydra wasn't just a many-headed monster, it was nature's ultimate survivor. Every time Hercules lopped off one of its heads, two more sprouted in its place, a gruesome spectacle that seemed like pure fantasy. But step into a wildfire-scorched forest or a hurricane-ravaged coastline, and you'll witness the same eerie phenomenon. Life not just persisting, but surging back with renewed vigor. The Hydra's regeneration might seem supernatural, but it's a near-perfect metaphor for how ecosystems rebound from catastrophe. Ancient storytellers couldn't have known about pioneer species or nutrient cycling, yet their myths captured these processes with uncanny precision. Take the Greek legend of the Gigantomachy, where gods and giants clashed so violently that mountains shattered and rivers boiled. After the battle, the tales describe the land slowly knitting itself back together, wildflowers blooming in craters, vines swallowing broken weapons, trees sprouting from blood-soaked soil. Modern ecologists call this secondary succession, the process where disturbed landscapes gradually recover through predictable stages, first hardy weeds, then shrubs, then towering forests. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Even the timeline matches. Some myths speak of barren battlefields transforming over 9 generations, roughly mirroring the century-long journey from scorched earth to mature woodland. What's even more striking are the specific survival strategies hidden in these stories. The Hydra's venomous blood, which made wounds incurable, finds its echo in allelopathic plants like black walnuts, whose toxic roots prevent competitors from growing nearby. The Norse myth of Yggdrasil, the world tree whose roots constantly decay and regrow, mirrors how fallen logs in old-growth forests become nurse logs, sprouting new life even as they decompose. Even the Aztec story of Tlaltecutli, the earth monster whose dismembered body became fertile farmland, aligns with the way volcanic ash enriches soil after eruptions. These weren't just colorful tales, they were observational science in mythological clothing. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in the Hydra's greatest weakness. Hercules only defeated it by cauterizing each severed neck with fire. In ecological terms, this mirrors the concept of resilience thresholds, the point where repeated disasters prevent ecosystems from recovering. Coral reefs battered by yearly bleaching events, or grasslands overgrazed into deserts, face this same fate. The ancients may not have understood climate models, but their myths carried a warning. Even nature's boundless ability to heal has limits. So why wrap these truths in serpentine monsters and divine wars? Because regeneration is messy, violent, and awe-inspiring, far easier to grasp through story than textbook. A lecture on soil microbiota wouldn't stir the soul, but a tale of a beast that grows stronger with every blow. That sticks today as scientists study how mangrove forests regenerate after tsunamis or how microbial life rebounds in nuclear exclusion zones. They're proving what myths never forgot. Destruction and creation are locked in an endless dance. The Hydra wasn't just a creature to be slain. It was a reminder life doesn't just endure, it evolves. The Golden Fleece wasn't just a shimmering prize in a hero's quest. It might have been a coded map to one of antiquity's most coveted resources. Ancient cultures where the fleece supposedly hung sat in a region now known as modern-day Georgia, a land crisscrossed with rivers carrying gold dust. Locals used sheepskins to trap these flecks in the water, a technique still practiced today. Over time, the practical method of gold harvesting could have morphed into legend, transforming woolly tools into a mythical artifact. But the fleece's symbolism runs deeper than gold. In a world where wool was as valuable as currency, controlling flocks meant controlling wealth. The Argonauts' voyage might not have been just an adventure. It could have been an ancient corporate takeover, wrapped in the language of destiny and divine favor. Look closer at the myth's details and the clues multiply. The fleece was guarded by a dragon, a common mythological stand-in for the dangers of resource extraction. In reality, Colchise's gold-rich rivers were fiercely protected by local tribes, and venturing into their territory was as perilous as facing a fire-breathing beast. Even the fleece's placement in a sacred grove echoes real-world practices. Many ancient cultures stored precious materials in religious sites, both to sanctify and safeguard them. The Greek pursuit of the fleece mirrors historical patterns of expansion, where stories of heroism often masked the scramble for materials that fueled empires. But the most fascinating twist lies in how these myths double as geological guides. The tale describes the fleece hanging from an oak tree near a rushing river, a setup that mirrors placer mining sites where gold accumulates. Similar stories appear worldwide. The Welsh legend of the Mabinogion speaks of a magical cauldron hidden near a river bend, while Inca myths describe gold emerging from tears of the sun in mountain streams. These narratives didn't just entertain, they encoded vital knowledge about where to find wealth, passed down through generations in a form too memorable to lose. Yet there's a darker thread woven into these stories. The fleece's curse, bringing betrayal and death to those who possessed it, serves as a stark warning about the cost of greed. Jason's triumph crumbles into tragedy, his crew scattered, his family destroyed. It's a pattern repeated in other resource myths, from the cursed gold of the Nibelungenlied to King Midas's deadly touch. These tales remind us that for every golden prize, there's a price. The Earth's treasures were never meant to be taken without consequence. So were these myths treasure maps or moral lessons? The answer might be both. By wrapping practical knowledge in epic adventures, ancient cultures ensured survival skills would outlast empires. And by lacing them with warnings, they taught balance, that resources are to be respected, not ravaged. Today, as we drill and mine our way through the planet, these old stories take on new urgency. The golden fleece wasn't just about what glitters, it was about knowing when to stop reaching. The haunting melody of the Sirens wasn't just a sailor's fantasy. It could have been the eerie soundtrack to very real maritime disasters. Homer's Odyssey describes these creatures luring ships to their doom with irresistible songs, their island littered with the bones of those who succumbed. But strip away the supernatural, and you're left with something far more tangible, the deadly acoustics of rocky coastlines. In certain parts of the Mediterranean, wind and waves create haunting harmonics as they rush through sea caves and jagged cliffs. The Greeks called it the voice of the rocks, a phenomenon modern sailors still report near places like the Gargano Peninsula in Italy, where limestone formations amplify the ocean's roar into something almost musical. To ancient mariners, exhausted and disoriented by weeks at sea, these sounds could easily morph into phantom voices promising safe harbor, right before the hull splintered on hidden reefs. What's chilling is how precisely some siren myths map to actual ship graveyards. The Strait of Messina, a narrow channel between Sicily and mainland Italy, was notorious for its whirlpools and shifting currents, and it's exactly where later Greek writers placed the Sirens' lair. Even the description of their flowery meadow matches the deceptive calm of coastal eddies where floating vegetation collects, masking deadly undertows. Norse legends tell of similar dangers near the Faroe Islands, where Valkyrie songs allegedly drew ships onto razor-sharp basalt columns. Modern hydrographers have confirmed these waters conceal underwater cliffs that create freak waves capable of capsizing vessels in seconds. The parallels between myth and maritime charts are too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Perhaps the most ingenious theory comes from the sailing traditions of the Marshall Islands. Long before GPS, navigators there used stick charts, woven maps showing wave patterns and currents with symbols marking places where ocean swells interacted with reefs to create strange sounds. These were essentially real-world siren markers, warning pilots away from acoustic traps. Could Greek myths have served a similar purpose? The Odyssey specifies that Odysseus's crew stuffed their ears with wax while he lashed himself to the mast, a perfect metaphor for the two ways sailors still avoid disaster, either ignoring distracting coastal noises altogether or confronting them with disciplined restraint. But why cloak these dangers in supernatural tales? Because fear sticks where facts fade. A dry list of coordinates wouldn't captivate generations, but a story about bewitching maidens with feathers and claws. That lodges in the memory. These myths transformed navigational hazards into visceral experiences, ensuring even the greenest sailor would feel a chill when the wind whistled through certain cliffs. Today, as oceanographers study ancient shipwrecks and compare them to siren lore, they're uncovering a truth as old as seafaring itself. The difference between legend and survival manual was often just a matter of interpretation. The real sirens weren't monsters, they were the sea's own voice, singing a warning we're only now learning to fully understand. The towering figure of the Cyclops, a hulking, one-eyed giant from Greek myth, might seem like pure fantasy, but what if this monster had a very real, very earthly origin? Imagine an ancient Greek farmer stumbling upon a massive skull half buried in the earth, its single, gaping nasal cavity staring back like a monstrous eye. This wasn't the remains of a god or a demon, but something far more mundane, the fossilized skull of a prehistoric elephant. Giants like Dinotherium, an ancient relative of modern elephants, once roamed the Mediterranean, and their skulls bear an uncanny resemblance to the Cyclops of legend. The large central hole where the trunk attached, to someone unfamiliar with elephant anatomy, it could easily look like the socket of a single, enormous eye. This isn't just speculation, it's a pattern. Across the ancient world, fossils fueled myths of dragons, giants, and otherworldly beasts. In China, dinosaur bones were interpreted as the remains of celestial dragons, while Native American legends speak of battles with giant serpents whose bones still lie buried in the Badlands. Even the Greeks themselves had a habit of labeling unusual fossils as proof of their myths. The massive shoulder blade of a mammoth, displayed in a Spartan temple, was said to belong to the hero Pelops. The thigh bone of a mastodon, unearthed on the island of Samos, was proudly claimed as evidence of Dionysus's divine lineage. These weren't just tall tales, they were early attempts to explain the unexplainable, a kind of proto-paleontology struggling to make sense of the past. What's truly fascinating is how these myths often preserved accurate details beneath the layers of embellishment. The Cyclops wasn't just a random brute. Homer describes him as a shepherd, living in caves and crafting enormous stone barriers. This matches the behavior of real-life elephants, who are known to use rocks to block cave entrances and have been observed herding livestock in some regions. Even the Cyclops' reputation for hurling boulders finds an echo in elephants' ability to throw objects with surprising force. The line between observation and legend blurs entirely when you consider that dwarf elephant fossils have been found on Crete, right in the heart of Cyclops territory. But the Cyclops is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The same process played out across cultures. In the Gobi Desert, the discovery of Protoceratops skeletons, small, beaked dinosaurs, may have inspired the griffin myth with its eagle's head and lion's body. In the Alps, the bones of cave bears were mistaken for dragon remains, leading to stories of knights slaying winged serpents in mountain passes. Even the biblical Nephilim, the giants of old, could trace their origins to the massive fossilized bones that litter the Levant. These myths weren't lies, they were hypotheses, born from a world where science and storytelling were still intertwined. So why did our ancestors see monsters where we see fossils? Because myth was their microscope, their way of magnifying the unfamiliar until it made sense. A dry anatomical description wouldn't have captured the awe of unearthing something ancient and strange, but a tale of a one-eyed giant. That conveyed the wonder, the terror, the sheer otherness of confronting Earth's deep past. Today, as paleontologists dust off bones that once fueled legends, we're not just studying prehistoric life, we're decoding humanity's first attempts to understand it. The Cyclops may not have been real, but the curiosity that created him, that's as alive as ever. The rainbow serpent slithers through Aboriginal Dreamtime stories not just as a creator being, but as a living barometer, its moods dictating the ebb and flow of water across the Australian continent. To the uninitiated, these myths might sound like simple nature allegories, but dig deeper and you'll uncover something astonishing, a sophisticated understanding of climate cycles that predates modern meteorology by millennia. When elders speak of the serpent retreating into deep waterholes during droughts, they're describing a phenomenon scientists now recognize as El Niño's drying effect. When they warn of the serpent stirring, bringing floods and storms, they're tracking La Niña's deluges. This isn't coincidence, it's centuries of observation encoded in narrative. What's truly remarkable are the specific predictive details woven into these stories. Certain Aboriginal groups recount how the serpent's scales change color before the wet season, a detail that aligns with modern observations of vegetation shifts preceding monsoon rains. Others describe how the serpent's movements correlate with the blooming of particular flowers, which contemporary ecologists confirm are triggered by subtle temperature and humidity changes. Even the serpent's connection to specific rock formations holds water literally. Geologists have found that many sacred sites tied to the rainbow serpent myth are natural water catchment systems where fissures in the rock channel precious moisture during dry spells. The stories didn't just describe weather, they mapped it. Compare this to the Yolngu people's calendar, which divides the year into 7 seasons based on environmental cues like bird migrations and flower blooms, a system that mirrors modern phenological studies. Or the Warlpiri tradition of reading ant behavior to predict rainfall, a method validated by recent research showing certain ants become more active before humidity spikes. These narratives functioned as living databases, preserving generations of ecological knowledge in forms too vivid to forget. While modern climatology relies on satellite data and ocean temperature indices, indigenous Australians were reading the land itself like a book, with myths as their annotated footnotes. The real test of this knowledge came during the 1970s, when Western scientists first documented El Niño's global impacts. Aboriginal elders, listening to radio reports of disrupted weather patterns, recognized the patterns immediately, not from journals, but from songlines passed down for countless generations. Their stories had already named the cycles, charted their rhythms, and prescribed responses. When to burn grasslands to prevent catastrophic fires, when to disperse to higher ground. Which seeds to store for lean years. This wasn't just folklore, it was a survival toolkit honed over 60,000 years of human adaptation. So why does this matter now? Because in an era of climate uncertainty, these myths offer more than just cultural insight. They're a reminder that science and storytelling were never truly separate. The rainbow serpent slithers on, not just in dream time, but in the quiet observations of desert wildflowers unfolding after rain, in the flight paths of honeybees before a storm, in the whispers of leaves that indigenous children still learn to interpret. The next time you check a weather app, consider this. The oldest forecast might not be on your screen, but in a story older than Stonehenge, waiting to be heard. The chupacabra isn't just a modern boogeyman, it's a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties. When livestock in Puerto Rico began turning up drained of blood in the 1990s, panic spread faster than the rumors of a fanged reptilian predator. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't an isolated phenomenon. From the goat sucker of Latin America to the beast of Gévaudan that terrorized 18th century France, history is littered with creatures that emerged during times of upheaval. The chupacabra didn't crawl out of nowhere. It stepped into a role carved out by centuries of collective fear. Look closer at the timing of these outbreaks, and a pattern emerges. The chupacabra hysteria peaked in the late 90s, when Puerto Rico was reeling from factory closures and economic instability. Similarly, the Mothman sightings of 1966 clustered around a West Virginia community facing industrial decline. Even the medieval werewolf epidemics coincided with famines and plague outbreaks. These creatures don't just haunt forests, they materialize when societies fracture, giving shape to formless dread. A farmer who's lost half their flock to an unknown disease is far more likely to see a monster in the shadows than a microscopic parasite. But there's another layer to this phenomenon: the role of actual animals. Many chupacabra reports describe hairless, canine-like beasts, a description that matches coyotes or dogs suffering from mange, a parasitic skin disease that causes grotesque hair loss and emaciation. In Texas, so-called chupacabra specimens have repeatedly turned out to be raccoons or foxes with severe genetic mutations. The Jersey Devil, another infamous cryptid, may have roots in misidentified sandhill cranes, their unnerving cries echoing through the pine barrens at night. These myths aren't pure fiction, they're distorted reflections of real wildlife, warped by fear and folklore. The most compelling parallel lies in how these stories spread. Just as ancient flood myths traveled trade routes, modern monster tales ride the waves of media. A single blurry photo or viral social media post can ignite a global frenzy, with sightings multiplying exponentially. In 2010, Russian officials blamed a snow beast for livestock death, until biologists identified the culprit as packs of starving wolves displaced by deforestation. The mechanism is the same as it was 500 years ago. Uncertainty breeds myth, and myth becomes legend. So why does this matter? Because these creatures are more than campfire stories. They're barometers of human stress. When economic instability, environmental degradation, or disease outbreaks strike, we still reach for mythological explanations. The chupacabra is just the latest in a long line of monsters that tell us less about the unknown and more about ourselves, what we fear, what we misunderstand, and how we cope when the world feels out of control. In that sense, the real mystery isn't whether these creatures exist, it's why we keep needing them to. High in the Himalayas, the legend of the Yeti isn't just about a shaggy, elusive beast. It might be one of humanity's oldest climate records. For centuries, Sherpa communities have described massive, ape-like creatures vanishing into the mist near glacial peaks, their footprints appearing and disappearing with the snow. But here's what's fascinating. These sightings often spike during periods of glacial retreat, when melting ice exposes hidden valleys and ancient pathways. It's as if the Yeti isn't just roaming the mountains, it's emerging from them, a spectral reminder of how much we still don't know about these frozen landscapes. Take the 1951 discovery of so-called Yeti footprints near Mount Everest by explorer Eric Shipton. The photographs of the enormous, elongated tracks sparked global fascination, but few noticed the timing. That year, the Himalayas were experiencing unusual thawing, with glaciers receding at rates unseen in living memory. Similar patterns appear in older records. Nepalese folktales speak of migrating snowmen during warmer cycles, while Tibetan manuscripts describe ice giants retreating to higher ground as valleys grew greener. These stories don't just describe a creature, they trace the pulse of the mountains themselves, recording shifts that modern glaciologists are only now quantifying with satellite data. What's especially revealing are the details embedded in these myths. Some Sherpa accounts describe the Yeti as a protector of sacred glacial lakes, warning villagers away during periods of instability when meltwater could trigger catastrophic floods. Others tell of the creature leaving strange markers, piles of rocks or twisted branches, near newly exposed crevices. To scientists, these behaviors sound less like folklore and more like early hazard warnings, coded in narrative to survive generations. The Yeti's legendary aversion to human contact might even reflect real ecological pressures, as warming forced animals like snow leopards and Himalayan bears to descend into populated areas for food. Encounters with unfamiliar predators could easily morph into tales of elusive giants. But the most compelling evidence lies in the ice itself. In 2017, researchers analyzing sediment from Tibetan glaciers found preserved pollen and microbes suggesting the region had experienced abrupt warming cycles long before industrial times. These natural fluctuations would have reshaped the landscape within a single lifetime, forcing communities to adapt and to explain. A Yeti fleeing advancing ice might symbolize the displacement of entire ecosystems, while sightings near melting glaciers could reflect the sudden visibility of long-buried terrain. Even the creature's white fur, described in some accounts as shifting color with the seasons, mirrors how alpine animals like the Himalayan marmot change coats to adapt to shorter winters. So why cloak these observations in myth? Because glaciers don't just hold water, they hold memory. As modern climbers uncover prehistoric tools and fossils in retreating ice, we're realizing how much history these frozen vaults preserve. The Yeti, in all its mystery, might be the Himalayas' way of reminding us that climate change isn't new. Only our tools for measuring it are. These stories aren't just about what's hidden in the snow. They're about what happens when it melts. From floods to fires, ancient myths may hold more truth than we ever imagined. These stories weren't just fantasies, they were survival guides, scientific records, and warnings for future generations. Think about it, every culture, no matter how isolated, developed eerily similar tales of cataclysms, from floods to falling skies. That's not coincidence, it's collective memory, passed down through generations in the only language durable enough to survive centuries: storytelling. The Greek myth of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, for instance, might encode humanity's discovery of controlled fire, a technological leap so profound it felt divine. The Aboriginal Dreamtime story of the Warramungunji, a creator being who shaped the land with floods, aligns with geological evidence of ancient sea level rises that redrew Australia's coastline. These narratives weren't just entertainment, they were the Wikipedia of their time, compressing survival knowledge into unforgettable allegories. What's truly humbling is realizing how much we've underestimated our ancestors. They didn't have satellites or seismographs, but they had something equally powerful: observation honed over millennia. When the Maori of New Zealand described their demigod moi fishing up islands from the sea, they were likely preserving memories of volcanic uplift events modern geologists now confirm through radiocarbon dating. The Cherokee legend of the Great Buzzard, whose flapping wings carved valleys and mountains, mirrors the erosive power of Ice Age glaciers that sculpted North America. These stories aren't primitive attempts at science, they're science in narrative form, capturing truths it took us thousands of years to rediscover with technology. But here's the most urgent lesson: these myths aren't just about the past, they're blueprints for resilience in an uncertain future. When indigenous stories warn of coastal spirits retreating before tsunamis, they're teaching us to read nature's warning signs. When Norse myths describe Fimbulwinter's endless cold, they're preparing us for climate volatility. Even the structure of these tales, passed orally, reinforced through ritual, holds wisdom. In a digital age where data can vanish with a power outage, myths survived earthquakes, wars, and millennia because they were woven into the fabric of culture. That's not superstition, that's sophisticated information preservation. So the next time you hear an old myth, listen closer. Behind the dragons and deities, there might be a kernel of truth, a flash of lightning that illuminated the night sky long before we understood electricity, or a flood so vast it reshaped civilizations. These stories are more than folklore, they're humanity's first experiments in science, wrapped in the only package guaranteed to endure: a good story. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the best stories, no matter how fantastical, often have roots in reality. Now it's your turn. What's the most intriguing myth you've heard that might hide a scientific truth? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden science behind the world's greatest stories. The past is speaking. Are we listening?